Graeme, thank you for speaking with me today. As you know, we're celebrating 50 years of International House this year, and as its founding director, I'd like to ask you how you feel 50 years on.
Thank you for having me here. It feels very familiar, particularly sitting in 50-year-old chairs, which I recognise very well. And the planning that you people have done and the events that have so far happened, I think have been marvellous. For me, it's been a very emotional year so far. I'm afraid that might get even worse.
And as the founding director, Graeme, why did you take up the role? And perhaps tell us what your aspirations were for the role of director.
That's quite an embarrassing question. And if I started answering, it'd take about half an hour. It was entirely accidental, like most of the things that have happened in my wife's and my lives. Mm-hmm. I never had any notion that there was even going to be an international house, and certainly no aspirations. It didn't relate to me at all. I was doing something else in Melbourne.
When you became director, Graeme, you stayed in the role for 22 years. Can you tell me what were some of the challenges you had, particularly in the early days as the director of International House?
Well, the big challenge was actually making or helping to make sure that the place did in fact come into existence. Because I was employed by the university 2 years before International House was ready to take students, because very wisely the deputy principal of the university, whose baby the place really was, he had the aspiration. He wanted a client to tell the architects and what really was needed, and to see the last of the fundraising through, and to work with the architects. The challenge was that was a job that I knew nothing about, and just had to feel my way. I'd been working and living in university colleges for the previous 15 years, ever since I left home as a schoolboy. But I'd spent my working life teaching philosophy, or attempting to, which didn't sort of have much to do with buildings and getting rid of terrace houses so that we could actually put the building up.
Graeme, has the house changed much since your day as director?
Well, I don't know nearly as much about what goes on here now as I did 50 years ago, but I think a lot must have changed. What hasn't changed is the feeling of the atmosphere of the place when you come in. It still has a remarkable feeling of joy in the place, and of goodwill, and of the students, the residents, being glad to be here and knowing in a sense why they're here.
Why do you think that is, or why do you think we're different from the other colleges on campus?
I think probably because from the beginning we've made clear, and you're still obviously making clear, that this isn't just a place to live on campus, and everybody who can afford it would like probably to live on campus, but it's here in order to promote friendship and understanding between Australian and overseas students. And that's clearly still part of the mission of the place and why it's here. It was very interesting that when it was being planned, the amount of money we were allowed to spend on these common facilities in relation to the first 120 rooms, study bedrooms that we were building, was strictly controlled by the university's commission. If we were to receive the $2 from federal governments and $1 from state government to match every dollar that the Rotarians raised, we had to comply with a certain formula. And as is obvious, the commons facilities here are far too big for 100 study bedrooms. And the university's commission said, you can't do that. people who in the Provisional Board of Management of International House said, but you don't understand, we're not just building yet another university residence, we're building an international centre on your campus, which we hope will have non-resident students as well as residents, and which will be having a whole program of activities that will be geared towards achieving our ends. If you like, the study bedrooms are one facility among others, like a cafeteria to eat and television and billiards and so on, to promote these purposes. Stop thinking about us as just another university hall of residence.
What are some of the most memorable moments or stories that you could tell us from your 22 years as the founding director?
None of them can be repeated, the most memorable ones.
Any particular story that comes to mind?
Well, I suppose one of the worst moments was in fact the day that the building was officially opened, when this room had 350 excited people stacked into it, and a row of dignitaries over there, including the governor of the state, who was to give the official words of declaring the building open. And all these people were to be moved at the end of the formal proceedings downstairs through a very narrow corridor to the dining room underneath to afternoon tea. And we'd planned the thing meticulously that the governor, who had difficulties walking, would be taken by me and Lady Cutler to the elevator, and I'd arranged with students to make sure that nobody else used the tiny elevator and to keep them away from it. So we took him there because the assembled company here stood quietly and let him get there. And sure enough, the lift was there with the door being held open. We put him in it together with the Chancellor of the University and a couple of others and pressed the button to go down one floor. But what I'd not thought to do was to station people at the other 9 floors and ask them to not press the button on the lift. So instead of going down the one floor, we proceeded to go up. And we went up one floor, the lift stopped, the doors opened, a crowd of people tried to get in, were shoved away, and this was repeated 8 times up to the top floor. By this time, there was a lot of perspiration in the lift and embarrassment, and the governor, whose sense of humour was well repressed, was not looking particularly happy about it. We proceeded to come down. We came down from level 8 to level 7. The lift stopped, the doors opened, people were pushed away. This was repeated all the way down to the basement. By the time we got to the basement, we opened the door and there was a mass of people still trying on the stairs to move from here downstairs. We eventually got the governor and his wife through to the room. I don't know what had happened to the food or what had happened to the cups of tea, but there was nothing there. It was loud noise, very happy occasion. Eventually the governor's party, I accompanied up to the entrance and out to his car, and he did manage a faint smile, and he said, "I wish you well. This is going to be a very happy place."
Graeme, if you had your time over again, what advice would you give to yourself as a young director of International House?
To fight harder than I did in the building process, to have the building as I wanted it, which was not just with one wing of study bedrooms, but on what was then the Leeds model. And 50 years ago, it was new. I still can't understand why they don't do it this way now. That every study bedroom should have had a tiny but adequate bathroom and toilet attached. And come the summer vacation, when in our day, there was no money for overseas students to go home, and even if there was, you couldn't afford the time it took a ship to take you home. So apart from the postgraduates who for vacations didn't apply anyhow because they still worked in the labs, the undergraduates, particularly those from overseas, stayed here. We were open and all the meals were provided all through the summer, including Christmas Day. Christmas dinner was a big event in International House. The Leeds model was that those students who wanted to work during the summer vacation didn't particularly want to work during the term when they were studying, stayed in their rooms, and the rest of the rooms became what we'd now call a backpackers' hotel for tourists. To make it work for tourists, you have to have proper facilities, and that kept the whole operation going with the students who wanted to staying here and earning enough money to pay for their accommodation for the room. I was unable to sell that model. That's my biggest regret.
Graeme, do you think the mission of International House is as important today as it was back in 1967 when the house opened?
In some ways it's not as important because Australians generally know much more about the people from other countries than they did even 50 years ago. The means of communication are so different, both physically and in terms of what you can hear and what you can read and what you can see that's instantaneously see it while it's happening around the world. Australia was much more isolated 50 years ago. The opportunity for Australian students to go overseas during long vacations, as so many of them do now, that just didn't exist then. The opportunities for Australian students to go on exchange didn't exist. All those things have changed. But what hasn't changed is the experience of actually living beside people from different cultures from your own, eating with them regularly. That experience is still rare and as important as ever. I think the other thing that's still as important as ever is for there to be a presence on campus that has got nothing to do with where students are living, but which is contributing to the discussion and the serious study of international relations and international problems.
What's the most valuable lesson you've learned from residents or alumni of International House?
One of the fundraisers, one of the volunteer fundraisers at the time, I used to feel slightly uncomfortable about when she always ran the line that, you know, underneath the different colours of our skins, we're all the same, really. I don't think that's quite right. My experience in International House confirmed my belief that, nope, that's wrong. The colour of our skins has got nothing to do with, but our cultural upbringing has everything. We're not the same as each other underneath, and it takes time to even discover that, and it takes much longer to learn how to live with it.
What achievements, Graeme, are you most proud of?
I don't know that I can think of it as my achievement, but the fact that the place got built in the first place, the fact that the first group of residents so willingly and successfully adopted the principles of the place and made such a success of it that it's remained all the way through, right to what you people are doing now.
Outside of International House, what are you most passionate about? What are your interests?
What are my interests?
Yes, what are you passionate about? What do you do outside of International House that people might not know about you?
Oh goodness, I think I'd rather they didn't. I spend a lot of time in the musical world. My wife, my daughter, my grandson are all professional musicians. I've had a great love for opera all my life.
And who's been your biggest influence in your life?
My parents, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Why is that? What did they influence you to do?
I find that a terribly hard question. The only person outside my family who I realised influenced me hugely was a man in London, Donald Soper, who, when I first finished school and was too young to be admitted to the university, I wandered around in England and on the continent for a couple of years. And this man used to preach in Hyde Park every Sunday and on Tower Hill every Wednesday. He was a pacifist. He was extraordinarily interested in international affairs. And he had a great influence on my discovering that there was so much more to what made Europe and the world work than I had ever realised in the country town in which I grew up. I hadn't yet then been to the university. He had a great influence. My wife and I went back and got him to marry us later.
What do you see as the future of International House, or what would you believe International House could contribute in the future?
Oh, I think that the core work that you do with the group of people who live here, that just must go on. In the future, I would hope that it would go back, in a sense, to what we probably made more effort to do initially, of keeping seminars about a particular international problem, or lectures for the public, like the Walter Westman lecture, so that on campus, outside the strictly academic area, but in a community of people who take problems seriously and fact seriously, that the House would be a real influence like that, in the way in which the Centre for Ethics already off the campus does something like that.
And as the current Director of International House, Graeme, what advice would you give to me?
Oh, from what I see, to just please go on doing what you're doing.
Lastly, Graeme, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I think that International House has achieved a huge amount in 50 years. I still I'm in contact with a lot of the people who lived here even in the first year. They're all old and grandparents now. It's quite clear that their lives were changed by their experience here. Most university students' lives are changed by campus, but it's remarkable what some of the people, right back from that time, the affection they hold for this place, and for their understanding of how important it was, their experience of living with people who came from communities that they never knew existed. We really do have very little understanding of what 9/10 of the rest of the world is living like.
Thank you for speaking with me today, Graeme. It's been wonderful to hear your history and your account of the first 50 years of International House.
Thank you.